support comes from the St. Louis Chamber Chorus. Season 68 concludes at John Burroughs at 3 p.m. on May 26th with the United Nations commissioned Voices of Today by composer Benjamin Britten, featuring youth and adult singers. Tickets at chamberchorus.org.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. And I've always made the argument that if you're not going to spend it on Metrolink expansion, spend it on something else.
I think it is all going to depend who gets into the race. If you're looking at 263 to 189, for example, a lot of people are still dying in this city.
Do you think that next year's melee for mayor will be one to remember, or will it be sleepy like some of Mayor Slay's campaign?
It's one thing to say that it is a renaissance. It's another thing to people to feel that it is a renaissance.
Last week, St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones delivered her State of the City address. Among other things, the Democratic official detailed what she felt were some of her accomplishments during her first term in office, including a pilot guarantee income program and investments in traffic safety infrastructure. And she also looked to a potential second-term agenda that includes the start of a major expansion of Metrolink light rail. But the big question going into Jones's reelection bid in 2025 is whether she can keep a racially diverse coalition together, especially amid some grumbling from left-of-center white voters who've backed her during her last two campaigns for mayor. Joining us now to discuss Jones's speech and reelection prospects is Rachel Lippmann, who covers city government and criminal justice for St. Louis Public Radio. Rachel, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
It's exciting to be on.
It is exciting to have you. What was your biggest takeaway from Jones's State of the City address?
I found it to be less of a speech setting forward an agenda and more of a speech on what her administration was able to do with the funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. That was the federal COVID relief funds. And that's fine, but it makes you wonder what next year is going to look like when all of those American Rescue Plan Act monies have been allocated and those programs are up and functioning. Is it going to be the same thing? Will she be able to find other accomplishments, other things that she's done in the year 2024 to 2025?
You know, let's stay on the financial part. She talked about how a lot of the accomplishments she was done was because of the aforementioned federal money. But she also talked about the potential headwinds from Jefferson City around the earnings tax. What did she have to say about that?
Well, this is one of those things where I think the dysfunction that you and Sarah so adroitly talked about in the last parts of the show ended up benefiting the city of St. Louis. There were some efforts by lawmakers to either restrict who they can collect the tax from, address some of the concerns around remote work and how the tax can be charged for employees who work for companies based in the city of St. Louis but are working remotely for those companies and don't live in the city of St. Louis. There were also proposals to eliminate it entirely. And that uncertainty, along with some other things, did lead the mayor to freeze non-essential hiring starting in late March. Because the legislature did not act, she was able to lift that freeze as of this morning.
Yes, breaking news for people who haven't heard it. But there's still some uncertainty about the earnings tax with litigation around remote work. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So this is one lawsuit that is over policies. There's two of them now, actually, and it's around policies in the way the city collects the tax or issues refunds. The city has always been willing to issue refunds for days that you travel, for example, and there's a lot of paperwork that you have to go through. Not everybody takes the steps to do that. But back in 2020, when people began working remotely because of the pandemic, a group of individuals in a lawsuit led by Beavis Schock sued over the fact that the city was changing its policy around awarding the refund for people who are working remotely for city-based companies. A judge did rule that those plaintiffs were eligible for the refunds. He's not yet expanded it to everybody who does remote work being eligible for the refunds. And there's now a second lawsuit filed by a law firm over similar questions about the city's policy around collecting the earnings tax.
And you know, this could reemerge in the legislature next year.
Of course.
So we got to be watching out for that. So I think the biggest takeaway I got from listening to the speech was less about policy accomplishments or proposals, but this part where she pushed back at the perception of a city that's decaying and declining.
I'm asking you, the next time you hear someone talking trash about St. Louis, you straighten your spine, look them in the eye, and tell them, you don't know what you're talking about. St. Louis is my city, and she is in the middle of a renaissance.
That is, of course, St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones during her State of the City speech. Could Jones really claim the city is undergoing a renaissance when the population continues to decline and worries about crime and disinvestment remain constant?
I think it is very difficult. You can claim anything you want. She can claim that her policies are a renaissance in a way of thinking, a new way of doing city government, a new way of addressing city problems that city government problems that cities have. But it's one thing to say that it is a renaissance. It's another thing to people to feel that it is a renaissance. And I think population decline is the biggest barrier to being able to say that. When you are continuously losing population over decades, and, we've dropped under 300,000 in the latest estimates, and there's no real end in sight, it's difficult, I think, to make that case.
And one of the reoccurring problems for people that live in the city is just basic services being available. Things like trash pickup, like street paving, and of course, public safety. How can Jones's administration make sure these vital services actually continue to improve, especially when there are other local governments right next to the city which pay more and are probably less stressful?
I think that is the biggest problem that this administration is struggling and will continue to struggle with, is just employment and getting people to work for the city. There are a couple of things that may make it a little bit easier for them to hire. She did announce today that the city's unveiled a new process and a new system that should make it easier for people to apply for jobs in the city. You no longer have to live in the city to work in the city of St. Louis. So that may make it easier to get people for those streets jobs, for, the summer cutting job, summer tree trimming jobs, forestry jobs, those kind of things. You don't have to pick up and move to the city of St. Louis now to take those jobs. But it will take investment in pay and investment in people. And right now in the budget, there's no mechanism for those raises.
And it seems like, would it be fair to say that any mayor, regardless of whether Jones continues after 2025, they're still going to have those headwinds about hiring and city services with them?
I think so, yes. I don't think this is a new problem, and I don't think it is one that is easily fixed, because in order to address some of those services like trash pickup, street paving, etc., you have to have the people and the human infrastructure to do that. And the only way that you can get human infrastructure is to make the job worth it, whether that's with pay, whether that's with benefits. This has nothing to do with Jones being mayor. It's just a fact of the system.
Now, one of the things that Jones highlighted in the speech was how the city's homicide rate is ticking downward compared to previous years. But I would say that actually continuing that momentum, and let's be clear, the homicide rate is still really high. It's just gone down.
Yes, but come down from a very, very, very high number to a slightly less high number.
I want to make that clear. It didn't go from like 300 to 0. It went
300 to 0 would not be realistic. You're looking at 263 to 189, for example. A lot of people are still dying in this city.
Exactly. But I think that if you want to have the homicide rate go down even more, I think a lot is going to depend on whether the city can continue to attract and maintain police officers, which is a long-standing challenge. What did Jones have to say about preventing the city's crime rate from backsliding?
I think the mayor would push back on the assertion that, we're going to have police officers to do this. What she highlighted were some of the alternate public safety programs that she has developed and created using American Rescue Plan Act funding, but also general funds through the Office of Violence Prevention, keeping homicides from actually happening through some of the other investments in things like cure violence, in sending mental health clinicians out on calls, or having calls to 911 where it may be a mental health need directed away from the public safety system. And that is what she highlighted as we are going to work to address problems that are that become criminal in nature because the police get called, but may not actually be crime, and then allow the police to focus on the individuals who commit most of the crime. And she also touted the involvement now regionally with the help of the East-West Gateway Council of Governments to bring the homicide rate down.
It really does seem like a regional approach to crime is going to be pretty vital here. I mean, the city of St. Louis has a pretty large police force, but some of the crime goes across borders between St. Louis and St. Louis County.
Absolutely. And between St. Louis, St. Charles County, between St. Louis and the Metro East. A regional approach is really the only way, I think, to address a lot of the key issues in the city.
But it goes back to my prior question. There is a workforce drain from the city to other municipalities in St. Louis County. Again, working in a St. Charles County municipality probably pays better than the city and is probably a lot easier than working in the city. And I don't know if that's a Mayor Jones problem. That's just, unless you combine every police force into one, which is not going to happen. The headwinds are
get that into existence.
I am speaking that into existence. We're going to have one giant police force that encompasses the entire. No, we're not. But can you talk about that? Because I think that's been a long-standing problem of a lot of mayoral administrations about recruitment of police officers.
Yes. I mean, it is difficult to recruit for police departments in general. St. Louis County has had the same problem. I'm sure if you talk to some of the other smaller municipal police departments, they have had similar problems in getting officers and quality officers onto the force. It is not necessarily specifically a Mayor Jones problem. Now, could some police officers view the policies that she has implemented, the way she has talked about police, as being a reason to, I don't want to work for this department, I feel devalued as an officer? Sure. But the difficulty in hiring police officers is not unique to the city of St. Louis, and it is not unique to Mayor Jones's administration.
One of the things I talked with Jones about earlier this year on the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air was Metrolink expansion and how she wanted to follow through on a promise to bring the light rail service up to North St. Louis. Here's what she had to say during her speech.
In 2017, St. Louis voters approved the sales tax increase to help fund the Metrolink expansion. And as a result, we've set aside $90 million for a new light rail line called the Green Line. This week, we formally began the project development phase, which we expect to finish construction in 2031. The Green Line will also connect to the red lines and the blue lines and will give St. Louisans the ability to move around the city for jobs, education, and entertainment, reducing the need for a car.
That, again, is St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones during her State of the City address. How realistic is it for Jones or whoever is the next mayor to actually pull what she just talked off?
Not really all that realistic, because the action to build Metrolink requires so many other bodies to act. So much of Metrolink is out of the hands of the mayor. It is good that we have the local sales tax that she mentioned. Federal government, other entities like to see that there's some local skin in the game, but it was never meant to be the entire source of funding, and it's not going to raise enough money to build it by 2031. So she has to hope that other bodies do act in order to have Metrolink, the Green Line, become a reality. It's moving along in the process, but the mayor is one bit player in this entire system. It is always good to have local support for it as well. But again, so much of that is out of Mayor Jones's hands.
You could make an argument that there's been some pressure in order to spend this sales tax just because it's been accumulating since 2017. And I've always made the argument that if you're not going to spend it on Metrolink expansion, spend it on something else. Is this maybe why there's some pressure now for an expansion to happen?
I think it is. I think it's more just a timing thing. I think it's that there's some momentum now because East-West Gateway Council of Government, some of the other regional bodies have started to move and to act and to get this project going. Now, is she getting pressure to say, hey, there's this pot of money, why aren't we using it? That is a possibility, but I think this is just a factor of the other bodies that are involved in this acting. The mayor can't act to expand Metrolink on her own.
Now, let's get to politics. Jones announced last week she's running for a second term. How do you think she stands in her bid for another 4 years in office?
I think it is all going to depend who gets into the race. If it is a more conservative individual in the lines of, let's say, a Tom Oldenburg or a Steve Butts, those are the names that we've heard mentioned, I think she'll have it pretty well, I think she will have a second term pretty well locked up.
And I guess if it's not a conservative person, so let's just say it's Alderwoman Kara Spencer again, how do you think that race shakes up?
I don't know. I think it depends on whether Spencer can present herself as an alternate to, I will be able to make the city function. It would be a rematch of 2021 if it was Spencer and Jones again. But Jones, the mayor, would have had an entire 4 years of either successes to point to, or Spencer could say, look, I would have done this better.
Yeah, and I think there's also a racial dynamic here. St. Louis City has a large black population. All the candidates you mentioned are white. How does that factor into prognostications?
I think it all depends on whether or who fills in the appeal to the white progressive voter. If somebody jumps in where that coalition or that part of the coalition says to Mayor Jones, you know what, we've disagreed with you on some things. This person is promising to more closely align with some of our values. It'll be interesting to see if she can hold a black the coalition of black voters together that she has built. It's really all going to depend on who jumps in and also finances, who will have the money. Well,
shifting back into legislative and a little bit of politics, it's been interesting to watch the dynamics between Jones and Board of Aldermen President Megan Green. Those two come from the same political factions, but they've disagreed pretty publicly over a lot of issues, including changes to firefighter pensions and a push to overhaul policies around homelessness. How could that friction affect Jones's reelection bid?
Again, I think it all comes down to who else gets into the race. If the white progressive voter in the city of St. Louis, a more left of center individual, looks at the candidates and says, you know what? This person still aligns relatively closely with my values. Mayor Jones still aligns closely with my values. Even though we have disagreed on some of the issues, I am going to continue to vote for Jones. However, if they see someone where they believe that they could get more out of that person when that person is in office, that is where I think perhaps she might have some trouble, perhaps not. But again, if she splits that vote, the white progressive vote, and her coalition of African-American supporters sticks together, then I think she'll become mayor again.
And these disagreements, I guess, are surprising to some because, as we mentioned, they're from the same political faction, but they have been pretty significant. I remember when Mayor Jones came on the show and said, no, we are not going to spend the Rams money on city raises. That not only seemed to be a difference in style and approach, but tangible things that aren't going to actually happen because the mayor could veto, essentially.
I think it is once you get into office, you have to govern. And that is sometimes what people struggle with, is the reality of you can campaign on everything you want and you can make promises. But when you get into actually running a city of about 300,000 people, a workforce of however much it is, dealing with the personalities of 14 different people, 15 different people on the Board of Aldermen, Comptroller Darlene Green, the police chief, other people who, are involved in this, you've got to draw a line somewhere. And I think practically speaking, spending one-time money on an ongoing expense doesn't make fiscal sense. And that is a reasonable argument to make.
In the last 30 seconds, do you think that next year's melee for mayor will be one to remember, or will it be sleepy like some of Mayor Slay's campaigns?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I think it will not be as sleepy as some of Mayor Slay's runs. I think there will actually be some opponents there. Again, you've got a primary and a general election that will actually both be competitive. Hopefully it's somewhere in the middle of the bell curve. It's not a complete melee, but I don't think it's going to be a sleepy non-affair.
Melee for mayor is something that I came up with, Twitter, by the way, and I'm very proud of that. Rachel Lippmann covers criminal justice and city politics and city government for St. Louis Public Radio. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be on.
This episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer, St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.